Hello, fourth grade, and welcome to Chapter 1, Lesson 2. We're going to talk about how has America stayed united, or how has America stayed united through growth and challenges. So in this lesson, we're going to use our investigative skills to explore what changes and challenges America explored as it grew into the nation it is today. By reading and talking about the important events in America's history, it will help you understand how the nation grew, and you'll be able to explain the challenges that helped shape America and how our nation grew from these different events. So in your workbook, we're going to hop over to page 16, and we're going to start reading in there. Again, pay attention to the blue bars on the side of your page, and we're going to follow those in our workbooks as we read. So look at the title. What do you think this text will be about? Circle words that you don't know. Underline clues that tell you who was involved in this event. When did it happen? What was the purpose of this event? For number 2, what do you think the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or what do you think the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness included in the Declaration of Independence mean? And then highlight or underline examples of the unfair treatment that people in the colonies were experiencing. For number 3, think about the writers of the Declaration of Independence. What message did they want to send? So you can write down any written parts of your answers over here in the My Notes section. Let's go ahead and get started on this reading. Declaring independence. Before the United States became a nation, it was a collection of 13 separate colonies. The colonies were ruled by the British King George III. Under the king, American colonists did not have the same rights as people living in Great Britain. They had no say in what laws the British government chose to make about how they lived or traded. They knew that this was unfair. The colonists wanted to declare their freedom from British rule. In May of 1775, after the American Revolution had begun, each colony sent separate representatives to meet in the city of Philadelphia. They called themselves the Second Continental Congress. The members of this Congress agreed that they should unite the colonies and govern themselves, which means they should be their own rulers. After voting to form an independent nation, the Congress decided to send out a document explaining its decision. In 1776, a committee of 5 men wrote the Declaration of Independence. Their names were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. The writers of the Declaration of Independence created several drafts that were edited and revised by members of Congress. Primary source. In their words, Thomas Jefferson, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." So this is a section that was written in the Declaration of Independence from July 1776. This is quoted from in there. Signing of the Declaration of Independence. The final document was approved by the Congress on July 4th, 1776. The members of the Congress signed their names at the bottom in support of the agreement. The Declaration of Independence announced to the world that the American colonists were free and separate people, ready to govern themselves. But before the colonists could truly govern themselves, there was a war to be won. Explore cause and effect. The cause is why something happened, and the effect is the result of what happened. So to find the cause and effects, you have to read the text all the way through, reread the text and look for something that tells you what happened. This is the effect. Reread the text again and look for the details that tell you why it happened. This is the cause. Ask yourself, did the cause directly lead to the event that happened? Based on the text that you read, work with your class, or we're going to be doing this independently, to complete the chart below. So a cause and an effect. So why did something happen, and what was the thing that caused it to happen? So you can talk over here about how, because they had no right to make decisions about how they live, they had no say in British laws, it caused them to want to govern themselves. Because they wanted to govern themselves, they decided that they needed a document to write out expressing what the rights and responsibilities are of people. And that's how they came to writing the Declaration of Independence. You can pull several causes and effects from the reading on the previous page. Now on page 19, we're going to read pages 18 to 27 in our research companion. That's our textbook, the hard book. And we're going to use our investigative skills to look for text evidence that tells you what happened and why it happened. This chart will help you organize your notes. So this is a giant cause and effect chart. As we go through the reading in the textbook, you're going to list the causes and the effects as you go. So you have space for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 causes and effects. You'll definitely find more than that in the reading. So let's go ahead and hop into our reading. So open your textbooks to page 18. And we're going to be reading from page 18 to page 27. Native peoples and European arrival. Who were the first people to live in North America? Scientists have found evidence of people from as early as 1400 BC. They may have come from Asia by crossing land connecting Siberia to Alaska, land that was exposed during the last ice age. These people were America's first explorers and settlers. Because of this, they have come to be known as Native Americans. Some groups created large communities and buildings, while others were nomadic, moving from place to place and following animal herds and exploring. Viking sailors also explored the coast of what is now Canada as early as AD 1000. Major European exploration began in the late 1400s with Christopher Columbus, John Cabot, and others. Later, England, Spain, France, and the Netherlands began to permanently settle in North America. As these Europeans took land from the Native American groups, it resulted in fighting. These conflicts continued as the settlements spread across the continent. From colonies to revolution. Europeans arrived in North America in greater numbers, looking for wealth and land. As farms grew, some people brought or bought enslaved African people. These enslaved people were forced to work and had no freedom. England established colonies along the Atlantic coast. The English colony Jamestown in Virginia was one of the first in 1607 with only 104 people. By the 1770s, there were more than 2 million people living in the 13 British colonies. Most colonists thought the rules and tax made by the British government were unfair. Some spoke out against the government. British soldiers came to control the angry people. Violence broke out. More and more colonists wanted to unite and fight for their independence from Britain. The first battles of the American Revolution took place at Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts on April 19, 1775. In June of 1775, the Second Continental Congress named George Washington as the Continental Army commander. So you can take a look at the picture at the bottom. You can see an image of George Washington taking command of the Continental Army. Forming a nation. On July 4, 1776, the Congress approved the Declaration of Independence. The American Revolution lasted from 1775 to 1783. With the help of General Washington's leadership, the Americans won the war. British and American representatives signed a peace treaty, and the British soldiers left the new nation. Representatives from each of the 13 colonies met to organize a system of government. They needed to develop a way to unite as one nation. Many states wanted to remain separate because they did not want a central power controlling them. Delegates or representatives from the states met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 at the Constitutional Convention. They drafted a document called the Constitution of the United States. This document brought the new states together as a single nation. Each state would have the power to govern itself within the laws of the Constitution. The Constitution ensured that the citizens would have a strong voice in how they were governed. George Washington was elected the first president. In 1791, the Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution. It provided guarantees of personal freedoms and rights to the citizens, but It would take years of struggle for these rights to apply to African Americans, Native Americans, and women. Westward expansion. Following the American Revolution, the new nation grew rapidly. People came to the United States for new opportunities. Three major events encouraged the expansion or the growth of the new nation. The Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson approved the purchase of the Louisiana Territory from France. This included land from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. In 1804, the members of the Lewis and Clark expedition explored the new territory and described its diverse geography. Over the next 50 years, cities, towns, and farms developed across this land. The Gold Rush. In 1848, gold was discovered in California. People from the United States and around the world headed to California in search of new opportunities. To reach California, people traveled across the continent along routes such as the Oregon Trail. This travel encouraged the settlement of land west of the Mississippi River. The Transcontinental Railroad. In 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. The journey across the country could be made in less than a week. The railroad led to new towns, industries, and further growth of the United States. The rapid expansion led to violent encounters with Native Americans, pushing them off their homelands. So, three of the things that encouraged people to move or expand and live in the United States to come over from Europe were the Louisiana Purchase, the Gold Rush, and the Transcontinental Railroad. And within each of these, you can find different causes and effects. Civil War. During westward expansion, the Union added more states. This caused debates on whether a new state should be a free state or one that allowed slavery. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. Lincoln opposed the expansion of slavery to new states. Southern leaders feared the end of slavery. In 1861, some slaveholding states decided to leave the Union and create their own nation, the Confederate States of America. The Civil War began at the Battle of Fort Sumter in South Carolina. During 4 years of bitter fighting, between 620,000 to 750,000 soldiers were killed, and cities and towns were destroyed. In 1865, the Confederate Army surrendered to the Union. The end of the Civil War marked the end of slavery in the United States. The nation needed to rebuild and enforce new freedoms for former enslaved people. Challenges in the early 1900s. In the early 20th century, the United States became more industrialized. People moved from farms to cities, and the country increased trade with other countries. In 1914, World War I broke out in Europe. At first, the United States stayed out of the war. In 1917, the Germans bombed American ships. America entered the war. The United States sided with the Allies, Great Britain, France, and Russia, against Germany and Austria. American troops helped the Allies win the war. The war ended on November 11, 1918. Through the 1920s, the United States became the world leader and the economy grew quickly. But in 1929, the stock market crashed. In the early 1930s, banks failed, trade with many foreign countries lessened, and worried people spent less money. The United States and the world entered into the Great Depression. Many businesses cut back on millions of people, and millions of people were out of work. Many were homeless and hungry. In cities, people stood in line at soup kitchens to get food. During this time, a drought on the Great Plains caused much of the land to dry up. Poor farming practices turned the topsoil to dust. Winds blew topsoil into enormous clouds of dust. Farmers couldn't grow food or raise cattle, and people had to move away to survive. In 1932, Franklin Roosevelt was elected president. The government enacted his New Deal plans to put people back to work, to reform banking, and to improve agricultural practices. The New Deal and World War II in the early 1940s helped end the Great Depression. Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange was a famous photographer from the early 1900s. At a time when women did not usually have careers outside their home, she used photography to document everyday life. In San Francisco, she focused her camera lens on the scenes around her. She saw people in line for bread, workers fighting for jobs, and other signs of poverty. During the Great Depression and Dust Bowl era, Lang traveled around the country documenting the hardships of Americans with her photographs. She found that people in rural communities were some of the most affected. Many families were migrant workers. They traveled from farm to farm looking for enough work to buy food. One of the most famous photographs, called Migrant Mother, shows a woman living in a tent with her hungry children. This was a harsh reality for the people Lang met. Lang dedicated her life to documenting hard times. Even though Lang won awards for her photographs, she also fought for social change. She hoped that the images captured of people suffering would get the public's attention. Her photos show what life was like for many people during challenging times in American history. Page 26, Emergence as a global leader. When World War II began in 1939, the American government waited to get involved. It was not until the 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor by Japan that the United States entered the war. The country was still recovering from the Great Depression. It became an issue of national pride for every person to do their part in the war effort. The United States joined the main allies, Great Britain, France, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, and the Soviet Union, and China, to defeat the Axis of powers of Germany, Japan, and Italy. By the time the war ended in 1945, the United States had firmly established its role as a world power. To prevent future wars, the governments from the United States, Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, and China proposed an alliance. Their plan was to create an organization that would promote global peace and cooperation between all nations of the world. In 1945, the United Nations held its first conference, with the United States as one of the primary members. Today, more than 190 countries are members of the United Nations. The headquarters of the United Nations are located in New York City. Following World War II, the United States continued to build a strong economy and exercised its powers as a world leader. America fought wars in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The United States also worked for peace in the Middle East, signed treaties with other countries, and continued to work in the United Nations. The United States also faced challenges within its own borders. People worked for change and equal rights for African Americans, women, Native Americans, people with disabilities, and other groups. Since the 1960s, the United States led the world in space exploration. Today, the nation continues as a leader in the development of digital technologies. The spirit of innovation continued as new industries developed, such as those that promote alternative energy sources. America is a nation founded on democratic ideals. Through its growth and challenges, Americans have strived for a more perfect union with freedom and justice for all people. These principles unite America and make the United States one of the world leaders today. So now that we've completed our reading, you can go ahead and pull some of the text evidence, some of the examples that you found from the reading to put into your cause and effect graphic organizer. So we did go over many causes and effects. Go back through one page at a time, and you can start listing some of the ones that you thought were most important. Once you've completed that, we're going to jump onto page 20, and we're going to review the research that we made based on the information that you gathered. How do you think America has stayed united throughout history? We're going to go ahead and write our paragraph in the Write and Cite Evidence section under Write About It. Think about important events or challenges that happened in American history from the text or your own research. Choose one event you think is most important in American history. Tell what caused the event, what happened in the event, and the effect that the event had on the United States as a nation. So for this, I want you to go ahead and pull something from the reading in those pages that we read in our textbook from pages 18 to 27 and write about it. Once you're done with that, for page 21, using what you've learned in the lesson, how do you think America became a stronger nation through the challenges it faced throughout history? Please make sure for both of these sections that you are using complete sentences, really clear handwriting, and using your text evidence. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. Otherwise, I hope you guys have an amazing day. Take care, 4th grade. Bye-bye.